Some memories don't stay in childhood. They follow us quietly into every room we ever walk into for the rest of our lives. For Judy Garland, one such memory came from a place most people would never guess. Not a difficult moment at home, not a harsh word from a stranger, but a small comment made backstage when she was still a child performing with her sisters. She had just finished a number. She had sung well. By all accounts, she had sung beautifully, the way she always did, even as a small child, with a voice that seemed far too big and far too knowing for someone so young. She came off stage, flushed and proud, looking for some sign that it had gone well. Instead, she overheard an adult, someone involved with the show, not a parent, comment quietly to someone else about her appearance. Not unkindly exactly, just a comparison. A remark about how she looked next to her sisters, who were considered, in the language of the time, the prettier ones. She was very young. Young enough that the words probably weren't even fully understood in the moment. Not as an idea, anyway. But they were felt. Something about them landed and stayed in a way that the praise for her singing, just moments earlier, somehow didn't. Those who knew Judy later in life, friends, collaborators, people who worked with her for decades, often noted something curious. No matter how many standing ovations she received, no matter how many times audiences wept and cheered for her, there seemed to be a part of her that never quite believed it. A part of her that, even at the height of triumph, was still listening for that other comment, the one from backstage all those years ago. She once said, in an unguarded moment, that she sometimes felt like there were two people inside her. One who could walk onto any stage in the world and feel for 2 hours completely loved. And another, quieter, older, more persistent, who still felt like the girl standing in the wings, overhearing something she wasn't supposed to hear, and believing instantly and completely that it must be true. That was the wound. Not a single dramatic event. Just one small moment at a vulnerable age that planted something which years of success never fully uprooted. This is something worth sitting with. Because so often, when we think about the things that shaped us, we look for big events, the major arguments, the obvious losses, the things everyone would recognize as significant. But sometimes, the moments that shape us most are small, quiet, the kind of thing that, to anyone watching from outside, would look like nothing at all. Maybe you've felt that too. Maybe there's a memory from your own childhood, small, perhaps even a little embarrassing to admit, that you've carried in some form for most of your life. A comment from a parent, a teacher, a sibling, that probably wasn't even meant the way you took it. But it landed, and some part of you has been quietly responding to it ever since. In how you see yourself, in what you believe you deserve, in the voice that whispers doubts even when everything around you says otherwise. And maybe, like Judy, you've spent years being told by plenty of people in plenty of ways that the old idea isn't true, that you are capable or worthy or loved. And maybe some part of you has heard all of that and nodded and even believed it in the moment. But underneath that old voice is still there, still quietly insisting on the original story. Here's something gentle to consider. That old voice isn't telling you the truth. It's telling you about a moment, one moment a long time ago, when you were too young to have any perspective, too young to know that adults say careless things, that comparisons are often more about the person making them than the person being compared. You believed it because you were a child, and children believe what they're told, especially about themselves. But you're not a child anymore. And the version of you that exists now, the one listening to this right now, has decades of evidence the child never had. Evidence about who you actually are, what you've survived, what you've built, who you've loved, and who has loved you. Judy Garland, even in her most difficult years, never stopped being able to move an audience to tears with a single note. That gift was real. It was never in question. The only thing in question was whether she could ever fully believe it about herself, whether the applause could ever quiet that one old voice from backstage. Maybe it's time to gently examine that old voice in your own life. Not to argue with it exactly. Old wounds rarely respond well to arguments. But to notice it, to recognize it for what it is, an old recording made a very long time ago by someone who didn't know what they were starting. Maybe it's time to ask yourself, if a child said this exact thing to me today, if a little girl or boy came to me and said, "I heard someone say I'm not as pretty as my sister," or "I heard someone say I'm not as smart as my brother," what would I say to them? You'd probably be gentle. You'd probably say something kind, something true, something that put the comment in its proper small place. Maybe it's time to say something like that to yourself. Not as a grand gesture, just quietly, the next time that old voice speaks up. That's an old story. It's not true, and it was never really about me in the first place. It's never too late to gently put an old wound in its place. Not erase it exactly, because these things rarely disappear completely, but to stop letting it speak as if it's the only voice in the room. There's something else worth knowing about Judy Garland. In her later performances, audiences often said there was something almost unbearably moving about watching her sing, not despite her struggles, but because of how openly they seemed to live alongside the performance. She wasn't hiding the wound. In some strange way, she was singing through it, and to it, and the audience could feel that. They weren't just hearing a voice. They were witnessing someone carry something heavy, beautifully, in front of them. That's worth remembering too. Healing doesn't always mean the wound disappears. Sometimes it means learning to carry it differently, with more gentleness toward yourself, more understanding of where it came from, and less power given to its old verdict. If you're watching this tonight, maybe there's an old comment, an old comparison, an old moment from childhood that's been quietly shaping how you see yourself far longer than it deserves to. Maybe it's time to look at it gently, the way you'd look at an old photograph, with some distance, with some kindness, and with the understanding that the person in that photograph was very young and very impressionable and didn't deserve to carry that weight for an entire lifetime. You don't have to fix it all tonight. You don't have to confront anyone or revisit anything painful in detail. You could simply notice, the next time that old voice speaks, that it's old, that it's been speaking for a long time, and that it might finally be allowed to quiet down just a little. Judy Garland gave the world some of its most beloved performances, carrying that old wound the entire time. Imagine, for a moment, what those performances might have felt like to her if she had been able to set even part of that weight down. If you're watching this tonight, maybe that's something worth imagining for yourself, too. Not a different past, just a gentler way of carrying it. There's another side to this, too, worth considering, gently. Maybe the old wound you carry wasn't something said about you at all. Maybe it was something you said once to someone else. A child of your own, perhaps, or a younger sibling, in a moment of frustration or distraction. Words you probably don't even remember anymore. But they might. If that thought brings up something uncomfortable, that's all right. Most of us, at some point, have said something careless to someone younger or more vulnerable than us, not out of cruelty, but out of being human, tired, distracted, imperfect. If there's a chance that something you said long ago might still be quietly shaping how someone you love sees themselves, it might be worth a gentle conversation. Not an interrogation, just an opening. Something as simple as, "I've been thinking about when you were young, and I wonder if I ever said anything that was hard for you to hear. If I did, I'm sorry. I didn't always know better back then." You might be surprised by what comes up. Or you might find that nothing did, and the conversation itself was still worth having, because it tells the people you love that you've been thinking about them and about the kind of impact you've had on their lives. Judy Garland's story reminds us that the people who shape us aren't always trying to. Often, they don't even remember the moment at all. The backstage comment that stayed with Judy for a lifetime was probably forgotten by the person who said it within minutes. That's not an excuse, but it is, perhaps, a kind of relief. These wounds are rarely personal in the way they feel. They're usually just careless words landing on soft ground at exactly the wrong moment. Knowing that doesn't undo the wound, but it can change its shape a little. It can turn "there's something wrong with me" into "something was said once, carelessly, and I was too young to know the difference." That's a different story, a kinder one, and, more importantly, a truer one. So take a slow breath, and maybe tonight let one old story, one small old comment that never deserved the power it's had, finally be seen for what it is. Small, old and no longer in charge.